Thank you for joining us for this Health Law Week event entitled Hiring Managers, What Are They Looking For? If you would please make sure that your lines are muted throughout the event. If you have questions during the presentation, please drop these into the chat. Or there's also a question and answer area, and we'll try and get to the questions throughout the program. And there will be time at the end of the program to follow up on those questions. We will be beginning momentarily. Thank you.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on from where you are joining us today. And thank you, Jennifer, for kicking off the discussions. Thank you to all of our participants today for joining this panel discussion. My name is Mujan Mangum, and I am a Principal and Chief Administrative Officer at PYA. And I'll be serving as presenter and moderator for today's discussion. So we hope you find today's panel information, what we all will share with you, helpful and informational, regardless of what brought you here today. We encourage you to ask questions. As Jennifer said, there will be time at the end for questions and answers. But between now and then, feel free to go ahead and type in questions or comments in the chat feature or the Q&A feature that you will see at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So first, we will hear from our presenters. Each of us serving as panelists today come with an area that we're going to highlight. So you'll hear about that. But before we share who the rest of us are and our focus area, I'd like to get a poll out so that we can see who's in the audience, and we don't mean your name or your firm, but what brings you here, so that we can help tailor any of our last minute comments when we present to you. So now the poll is on your screen. Please go ahead and take a few minutes to answer these questions. Okay, we're seeing some answers come through. And once we finish going through these, Jennifer will share all of the results so we can all see it together. I see we're still answering, so we'll give another minute or so. All right. Should we end the poll? Jennifer, do you see any other responses coming in? Okay, great, awesome. So you see we're sharing the results here. What brings you to the session today? So most of our attendees are looking to transition to another area of health law. So panelists are going to keep that in mind, or looking to start a career in health law. Many of you are attending for all of the above, so that's really good. It looks like in-house counsel is an area of a lot of interest, so we're gonna kind of work up to that. We'll make that our last panelist discussion, so you can all wait with bated breath for that in-house counsel one. And then I think the question number 3, in what healthcare setting are you working in currently? So government looks like a large area there, in-house counsel, followed by law firm, compliance, and consulting. And then the last question, how long have you been in this space, healthcare and or health law? So most of you are starting out or in that entry level position up to 4 years. And then we've got the balance there in 5 to 10 years plus, and a few in more than 10 years. So that's really helpful for us. Thank you for answering those questions. It's good to know who makes up the audience. So that's very helpful. All right, well, thank you for that. We will I think we've stopped sharing that. So let's turn it over to our panelists. Our panelists will introduce themselves. Before I turn it over to Catherine, will kick us off. PYA is a professional services firm, and my position today is to talk with you about consulting. Catherine?
Sure, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Clement. I am the Senior Legal Recruiting Regional Manager at K&L Gates. We are a law firm with offices in over 40 locations. We've got about 2,000 lawyers internationally. My responsibility at the moment is managing recruiting for our 5 offices in Raleigh, Research Triangle Park, Charlotte, North Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, and then Nashville. I work on lateral recruiting, partner recruiting, and student recruiting. And our offices have a variety of practice areas in them, everything from litigation and intellectual property to healthcare and construction. But we do have a large healthcare practice at the firm, and the center of that healthcare practice is located in our Research Triangle Park office in North Carolina, which is one of the offices I'm responsible for. So I do a good bit of healthcare recruiting. And then we recently opened a Nashville office on January 1st, and one of the cornerstone practices of that office is also healthcare. So I have about 11 years of legal recruiting experience for firms. I've worked in the DC market, in Chicago, and now here. I have some experience in Southern California as well. I also have a master's degree in social work from the University of Michigan, and I spent about 3 years in the middle of my career working at a business school at the University of Chicago, coaching MBA full-time students and kind of in a variety of different sectors. So very excited to be here. Happy to answer any questions you have about law firm recruiting. Thanks.
Awesome. Dina?
Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the country today. My name is Dina Ombres, and I have the privilege of serving as the Chief Compliance Officer for Springstone, which is a hospital company that operates hospitals across the country, providing both inpatient and outpatient psychiatric and substance use disorder treatment for individuals and children too, adolescents and kiddos. Prior to that, I was Chief Compliance Officer for ResCare, which is a company that provides services, residential and vocational services to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I transitioned into that chief compliance role after serving as their associate general counsel for a number of years. I am an attorney. I also graduated with a master's in public health. Really, what else am I going to do except go into compliance? I'm excited to talk with you all and share some experiences I've had moving and transitioning into healthcare compliance. I think it's a great area to be in, and I look forward to sharing that information with you all.
Thank you, Dina. Kirk?
Hi, good afternoon, good morning to everyone. My name is Kirk Sipigno. I am the Deputy Branch Chief for the Affirmative Litigation Branch for the Office of Counsel, the Inspector General for the Department of Health and Human Services, which is kind of a long title. And I need to say that I'm appearing obviously today in my personal capacity, and I don't speak for hiring for the federal government. My background is I graduated from the University of Michigan with a degree in cellular molecular biology. After that, I was kind of bored with being a biochemist, and I joined the Marine Corps. And the Marine Corps put me through law school and gave me an LLM. I did a lot of litigation, criminal defense litigation primarily, which was the background that led me to getting my current job. I retired from the Marine Corps in 2015. I was in private practice for about 3 years, joined the office in 2018 as an associate counsel, and then was promoted to senior counsel and then the deputy branch chief for the affirmative litigation branch in 2019. So, I'm talking about federal law employment specifically, but I think I'm here as representing the government, sort of the government employment piece.
Thank you, Kirk. Bill?
Good afternoon, good morning. I'm Bill Azeltine. I am the Senior Vice President and General Counsel at Yale New Haven Health. I also function as the Chief of Staff to our Chief Executive Officer. I've been here since 2007, having relocated from California. Mujan, I was happy to see that you didn't ask how many people have been practicing in health law for more than 30 years. I began my career in health law after graduating from the University of Michigan Law School in 1990. I practiced at a law firm in San Francisco for a few years and went in-house as a fourth-year attorney. And I've never looked back. With all due respect to my colleagues in other fields, I love being in-house, and I'm happy to share with you some perspectives today.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I'll share a little bit more about my firm too, but I'll save that until in our next section where we talk about our presentations. So, I will call on each presenter and again, remind you of the area. So Dina, would it be all right to start with you in compliance?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Allen. So this year, I actually, this topic is kind of near and dear to my heart because this year I actually got to hire another compliance officer for my department at Springstone, which was interesting to do hiring during the pandemic. It was, I was concerned that I wasn't going to get any candidates, quite frankly, and I was astounded by the number of people who did apply. You know, in compliance, you're looking for somebody that has a little bit of operational experience and understands how a business runs, but also has that legal acumen and understanding of how to look at the regulations and how to then apply them to the particular business that you're in. And so when I go looking for a compliance officer, I'm not always necessarily looking for an attorney. The person I ended up hiring actually has a finance background. That said, I have had attorneys as compliance officers. They make good compliance. We make great compliance officers. And I think it's important to understand how you're not litigating so much as you're counseling, right? And you're the person who is helping folks to not just identify what compliance issues they might have or concerns that they might have, but you're also helping your business partners within the organization to correct them and prevent those compliance issues from happening again. So you're always thinking, you're not, and you're working hand in hand with your business partners. And those business partners can be the folks who are actually operating the hospitals. It could be your cohorts in the finance or revenue cycle department, or it could be an HR. So you really have to be, I think, cognizant of who you're working with, as well as be able to dabble in a little bit of all of those issues and not necessarily be quite so tunnel visioned when it comes to the regulations. That said, you know, if it deals with Stark, false claims, anti-kickback, those are squarely in compliance's wheelhouse. And I field a lot of questions about how do we handle this kind of referral? How do we handle gifts and gratuities? How do we handle things, you know, that may run afoul of those bigger regulations that we need to take a look at? I also work hand in hand with our health information management folks who do all the coding as well as the billing. So having that knowledge about revenue cycle is really helpful, which is why I ended up hiring the finance person who had that kind of experience. You know, when I look at hiring somebody, I'm looking for somebody that's enthusiastic. I'm looking for somebody who is willing to learn and put in some time to meet and talk with all of our business partners within the organization. I'm looking for someone who has good communication skills, not just written, but also verbal, and someone who's willing to listen, because a lot of the job is listening to what my business partner wants to accomplish and then working with them to figure out how can I get them there. It may not be a straight line from A to B. We may have to go on a detour through the countryside, but I'll eventually, you know, work like the Dickens to get you over to point B. But it's knowing how to get you there, and being willing to work to get you there. I think too, the ability to be collaborative and work with people is really important in the compliance space. And then also sometimes we need to think outside of the proverbial box and color outside the lines. Again, that's the maybe not a straight line, but I'll take you through the countryside. We'll go on a great trip, but and we'll get there eventually. But thinking creatively of how to solve for some of the problems that my business partners may have, and stay within the regulations. and stay compliant. So that's where we are in compliance. Like I said, I was able to hire during the pandemic. That process was really interesting. I didn't meet anybody live. Everything was through Zoom, which was a little different for me because I like to meet people personally and face to face and really have a conversation with them. And so that was a little bit different. The other nice thing about compliance is that you don't necessarily have to be in an office. So you can do a lot of work from home, which is nice. As long as you're staying in touch with your business partners and talking to folks, that work from home hybrid even works really well in a compliance field.
Thank you, Dina. That was really helpful. So just we'll go to Kirk next, representing the government space, not speaking for the United States government. But just as a reminder, if you have any questions for Dina, go ahead and drop them into the QA feature, the chat feature. And as Jennifer said, we'll answer questions at the end. So with that, we will transition over to Kirk.
Thanks, Mijan. Yeah, I want to basically talk about 3 areas which I think will be sort of helpful to anyone who's looking for a job in the government. Some of it applies specifically to the federal government. I'll be talking about sort of finding a position and making your application and your application materials. A little bit about interviewing. I interview in one of my capacities at work is I'm one of the law clerk coordinators, and we hire 9 law clerks from law students each year. So I get to see a lot of resumes and I do a lot of interviews. I'll talk to you a little bit about those interviews because the things that I do there, I'm doing when I interview permanent candidates as well. I'm thinking about the same sorts of things, and then I'll just sort of directly address what it is I'm looking for. I think when we talk about finding a position, and as it is in everywhere, I think that it's helpful if you know someone in the organization that you're interested in. And I think that some of the other presenters are probably going to be talking about networking a little bit. And I think when you're networking, it's important to remember who you know at particular organizations if you're interested in working there, because those people can give you a line on when a job is being thought about being solicited for, when a position may come open. That's actually, frankly, how I ended up getting my position. I was sort of given a heads up from someone on the inside that they were looking for someone with litigation experience, and the health law experience wasn't as important as litigation experience. And I had a lot of litigation experience, and he told me about the position before it came open. And to that end, it's sort of like your experience with the organization is very helpful. I think we have like about 6 attorneys now that went through our law student clerk program, and they were smart enough to sort of keep in touch with who it is that was at the organization and get that inside information. Obviously, you can't always know, you can't always have someone on the inside. It's helpful if you do. You can look at USA Jobs. That's a very good site, obviously, for finding federal employment, but you should also look at the organization's website that you're looking for specifically. They'll often, like we will often put career postings on that website, and the USA Jobs post will just say, look at the career posting on the website, if that makes sense. And this is one of the tips and tricks. The next thing for applying, I think, is very, very important. You have to make sure that it is totally unequivocally and unquestionably clear. That's 3 adjectives emphasizing it, obviously, so I really mean this point, that your application materials demonstrate that you have the basic qualifications that are in the posting. And what I mean by that is, if it says like you need to have 3 years of experience growing avocados, then you have to put the words, I have 3 years of experience growing avocados on your resume. And that may seem pedantic, but you have to understand that the hiring managers are not doing the initial screen on these. And that means it's an HR person, and the HR person, if they are not sure if you have the qualifications, then they're probably going to mark you as unqualified. And you don't want that to happen, obviously, because if you're marked as unqualified, your resume never even gets to me. Okay, so that's like, if I can give any kind of advice for the federal government, that's the most important thing. And I wouldn't say, obviously, don't stretch your experience, but you want to make sure that if you have things that are well within the bounds that would count, that could be considered whatever it is they're looking for, then you should count that and put that on there. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. And then I'll go into sort of the interviewing process. I think once we get to the interviewing process, I'm going to talk about my organization specifically because it's sort of done the same way. We start with very generic questions, and these are questions like, why aren't you interested in working for this organ? Why are you interested in working for us? And can you describe a time when you faced a complex legal question and how did you approach it? Unfortunately, this is an area where you can really only lose ground because as when I'm hiring an attorney, like if you don't have the foresight to sort of recognize that I'm going to ask you some of these questions, then you're probably not a very good attorney, frankly. And so you should have an answer. Like I'll give you another example. We say, what is one of your strengths and one of your weaknesses? Like I'm willing to bet of all the 39 participants, you've heard that question asked before, right? So if you do not have a good answer to that question, then you will lose ground. If you have a good answer to that question, then you're basically just sort of treading water. And that's just the unfair reality of those like basic questions. On the flip side of that is I don't think they really, I mean, I don't think they tell that much about the question, the candidate when you answer those questions because they're so prepared. One of the other ones, tips and tricks that I put down is that if you list hobbies and interests on your application, it's really likely that I'm going to ask you about them personally. And same with papers and publications. And the reason I'm going to do that is I'm going to ask you a question like, first of all, just as a side note, like if you look at the hobbies and interests as far as my anecdotal evidence of reviewing the resumes I see, like everyone is a hiker and everyone in the world is a runner. Like everybody hikes and runs. That's all law students do apparently for their free time. But I'll ask you, like if you say you're a sports fan who watches hockey, I'll ask you who's the best two-way forward in the NHL right now. And the reason I'll ask that is because I want to sort of take you out of your comfort zone of the prepared questions and figure out how are you going to formulate your answer? Like, do you take time to think about it? Is there a transition period when that's noticeable when you're organizing your thoughts? Do you ask me if I ask you a difficult question? Do you ask me, give me a moment, let me think about it? Because that's a totally acceptable thing to do and understandable thing to do. And it's sort of like a functional measure of your poise, I would say. Like when you're all attorneys, if you've been in front of a judge, you know that there are times when you have to say like, hey, Your Honor, can I just have a moment? You have to have that sort of confidence. And that's sort of what I'm looking for when I'm interviewing people. Another piece that I put on is if you're a lateral mover, if you're coming from, a firm, a well-heeled firm maybe, we're going to ask you why you want to leave, why you're making the lateral move. And I'm not telling you what to say, but some form of the words like, I want to serve the country should probably come out of your mouth. That would be helpful because it's not a secret what the lawyers in the federal government make, right? So there's going to be some question of why you want to do that. For me, I'll just tell you my answer. My answer was I spent a lifetime of service in the Marine Corps and I was in private practice and I didn't find it as rewarding for me personally to be furthering interests that were just my clients. I wanted to be out doing some good for the collective government. That was my answer. And then that just takes me to my last point, which is like, what am I looking for? Especially for, I think, government employees, and especially in the federal employment, I am really, really looking to see what kind of person you are and how you will fit into the organization. Like your skills and your skill sets and your like years of experience, it's helpful, right? But I can get, and I have lots of experienced people in the federal government who many of whom are the subject matter experts in the things they look at. So what I'm really looking for is what kind of person are you? What kind of integrity do you have? It's hard, obviously, to judge, right? I only get 30 minutes, but that's what I'm looking at. I'll look for evidence of your intellectual curiosity, evidence of your work ethic, and I want to look to see if you're in a good fit for my team. And is there any evidence that you work well on a team? And I think the reason for that is probably pretty evident, but I'll just sort of spell it out for you. Like once you're in the federal government and you pass your probationary period, it's more difficult for me, frankly, to get rid of an employee than it is maybe in private practice where it's at will hiring. So I'm very careful with respect to who we let into the organization permanently.
Thank you, Kirk. That was really helpful, really enlightening. I do not have any insight into that space, so thank you for sharing your comments. Bill, your area was the area where we had most interest, but I'd like to ask you to go ahead and share your thoughts now, and then we'll move to Catherine. I'll go last with consulting.
Sure, and clearly our participants have chosen wisely. I really do enjoy being in-house, and interestingly, listening to Kirk and Dina, I'm going to say a lot of the same things. So what we look for in-house counsel is, I think, Kurt and Dina, similar to what I heard you all describe, some basic knowledge in healthcare, Stark anti-kickback, for example, that's generally a foundational matter, with some exceptions. So we have 2 employment attorneys who came to us with employment experience, and they've since gotten to know the healthcare space. But generally, this is the American Health Law Association, so you all are interested in health law, so having some fundamental knowledge about healthcare laws. And related laws. We are a not-for-profit tax-exempt organization, so some understanding of how that plays into our governance. Kirk, we're not the government, but we are a mission-driven organization. So I think similarly having an understanding of what that means and having values that are aligned with that mission, I think is important. There's the substantive knowledge, and actually law firms, the government, I think, provide good training ground. I said I started at a law firm before going in-house. We don't feel like we have the ability to take sort of new or brand new people in the healthcare space. So folks who have spent a few years at a law firm are great candidates for us. The big difference between, I think, in-house counsel and outside counsel in particular, a law firm, for example, is, and Dina, you referred to it, problem solving. I think lawyers are problem solvers. People come to us for a certain reason. And I know some very, very fine outside lawyers who could never make it in-house because they may be theoretically really good. They may know their stuff better than anyone. But what we do in-house is we take complex legal issues and distill it into practical advice. And a lot of people are not comfortable with that. I remember when I went in-house, my office was in a hospital. I would go to the cafeteria and I would be cornered and I would be asked for legal advice. And frankly, it scared me. It was, you want my advice? And the answer was yes, they did want my advice. And I had to get comfortable answering questions either on the spot. You can't always tell people, no, I'll get back to you. You have to know the difference though. You have to know, okay, this is an issue. I need to go back and do some research. But more often you have to rely on your judgment. And again, not everyone is comfortable with that. But if you always tell someone, I can't answer that right now, I need to go do some research, I need to call outside counsel, they're not going to have confidence in your advice, and they're going to stop coming to you, and that's not a good thing. A couple other things I think I look for, and I think I also heard this too, I think Dina, you referred to listening. And I noticed one of the questions, how do lawyers gain operational experience? I think that is a terrific question. And I think it's by seeking first to understand and then to be understood. I think as lawyers in particular, we are sometimes trained to be very quick with answers. And what I try to tell, we have 16 lawyers here in my department. And we talk about this a lot. The substance of what we do is the easy part. How we do it is more challenging. So listening, understanding operations, understanding the business objective. By the way, the question that you end up answering is not always the question that someone came to you with. Often they don't know what the question they should be asking is, and part of our job is to help them see that. These are fast-paced. I think the day when in-house counsel was viewed as a place to kick back and relax, I think those days are gone, if they were ever here. These are fast-paced, often stressful positions. I look for humility and a sense of humor. And Kirk, it's what you were referring to. It's really important to be a part of a team. No one does anything alone. We are all team players. We have actually, with 16 lawyers, most of us are generalists. We have some specialties as well. So you may be a generalist in health law, but you may specialize in tax exemption. We need to work together on those issues. And I think humility and having a sense of humor helps that. And then lastly, and I think folks have alluded to this as well, and in the tips and tricks, we value diversity. I value diversity. I think stronger teams are diverse teams, and I look for different racial and ethnic perspectives, background, Kirk, military experience. We don't get a lot of people apply with military experience. I don't want a group that is all thinking the same way. As counsel, I like members of the team to raise their voices and to offer a different perspective than I might have. So we actually have a practice here. It's actually served us very well. We don't make hiring decisions without a diverse pool. So we may have several qualified candidates. If those candidates are not diverse candidates, we hold the position open. It's not always easy with our finance department. They'll say, if you're holding the position open, it sounds like you don't need it. And we will say, no, consistent with our value for diversity, equity, and inclusion, we want to make sure we've considered a diverse pool. And we have gotten terrific hires as a result of that practice. So I think that's the in-house counsel perspective.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, just Kurt, your point about the screening, we don't have a lot of need for avocado growers here. But the screening point is a very good one, because that happens in corporations as well, where the HR department or an outside provider is going to look at a resume initially and make a very fast decision about whether the basic requirements for the position are met. So I, in my tips and tricks, said, make sure your resume, if you are able, is seen by the right person, because sometimes very good qualified candidates are blocked by the screening. So Kurt, I thought that was great advice.
That's
Yeah,
right.
and I'll agree with Bill and Kirk. I mean, we have in our organization, we also had screeners and how that works. And so, that's looked at. That said, I also, I spoke with my HR hiring partner and said, hey, you know what, there's a couple, if they're on the cusp, I definitely want to take a look at, because I do want to consider outside of the box. I don't necessarily want cookie cutter people in compliance, because Bill, to your point, the diversity of thought and experience and process really helps in compliance in terms of, people looking at different things and people thinking about problem solving in different ways. And so sometimes, I'll say, okay, can I just take a real quick gander just to make sure that I'm not missing out on anything or anyone that I think could be a possible good fit.
That's right. Well, thank you, Bill and Dina, for those comments. So just a time check. We're eating into a little bit of our QA time, but I'm glad to see that you all are typing questions in and we're answering those as we go. So Catherine, do you want to spend a few minutes on your area?
Sure. So I'll talk just briefly about the types of candidates that we're seeing. And then I'll talk a little bit about some tips and tricks, because I suppose that I am the person you've been referring to, who's the gatekeeper in the first line of review. So I can kind of give you some ideas of what I look for when I'm reviewing initial resumes. So excuse me, I'm getting over a little cold, so pardon my cough. So in terms of our healthcare practices, we do hire a lot of people with a really wide variety of backgrounds. Of course, many of our lateral hires do come from healthcare practices and other law firms, but I went through some of our recent hire resumes and was looking at the backgrounds. And we recently hired somebody who was in risk and regulatory affairs for a dental school and had a background in risk management and compliance. We hired someone recently who came from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. So making a law firm lateral move doesn't necessarily require that you have law firm experience. So depending on your experience, I'd just be aware that it may not be a one-to-one translation in terms of class year. But that doesn't mean it wouldn't be as well. In terms of what we look for specific to health law, we love to see people engaged in the health law community. So obviously affiliation with the AHLA is wonderful. We look at things like American Public Health Association. We see a lot of people, I'm in North Carolina, so we see a lot of people engaged with the North Carolina Society of Healthcare Attorneys, For more junior people, we look at involvement in your law school's health law society, relevant health internship experience, perhaps a master's in public health or something along those lines. In terms of tips and tricks, I echo a lot of what people have already said, or I won't echo it, but I agree with what a lot of people have already said. I always remind people that networking is obviously important, but do it for your career and not for a job. I think we see a lot of very transactional networking where you want a job, you reach out to the person that works at that employer, and you sort of expect that that's how it's going to work. And, your network is a living, breathing thing. And I think it's really important to cultivate that network throughout your entire career. And a person that you meet today may not be able to get you a job tomorrow, but they may be able to help you get a foot in the door in a year or two. In terms of that transactional nature, I definitely think that connecting on LinkedIn with people that you don't actually know in person is not something I would recommend doing. I think everyone may have different opinions about this. I, as a recruiter, get a lot of LinkedIn requests from people who've submitted applications and I don't know them, and I don't accept those requests because to me, that just comes across as quite transactional. So if you do want to do that, I would just recommend putting a little note in the box saying why you're looking to recruit or why you're looking to connect with that person. Do your research. Obviously, there's plenty of public information out there about employers, and asking questions during informational or actual interviews that you can find on Google just isn't a good use of time. You would be surprised. I say this, and I think, oh well, it probably goes without saying, but you would really be surprised with how many candidates we see that don't prepare ahead of time. Reviewing the firm's website, looking into the professional backgrounds of people you're meeting with, understanding in the case of a firm like K&L Gates where the healthcare practice fits within the larger context of the firm. Those are really critical ways to show your interest and engagement. And in terms of the screenings, I actually love reading cover letters. I find them to be very interesting, and I look at them as writing samples. So do not sleep on proofreading your writings or your cover letters, because those are oftentimes things that we look at to determine a candidate's writing skills. But interest is a two-way street, so if you have met with people or if you've engaged on some level with someone at the firm, put that in your cover letter, because I'll look at that and I'll see, okay, this person has expressed an interest in the firm that isn't just sort of, oh, I saw the job posting and I decided to throw my name in the ring. Similarly, it's very easy to find the recruiter's name, the points of contact that are doing the hiring, and it makes a big difference to address the cover letter to that person instead of to dear hiring manager. So just finding ways to demonstrate that you've actually taken the time and are interested, because just as much as you want an employer to want you to work for them, we want people who want to work for us as well. And those are easy ways to show that. So I think those are kind of the main points I wanted to hit, but I'm happy to answer any questions when we get to the Q&A point.
Thank you, Catherine. So I'll end with just this presentation portion from the panelists on talking about consulting. And I'm actually going to pare down some of my comments just because I agree with everything everyone has said. And the consulting world is very synonymous to a law firm. So a lot of Bill's comments especially resonate with what we look for. But first I want to paint a picture of PYA. I didn't do that earlier just to not be repetitive. And I want to do that so you get some context on where we come from when we say consulting. So we're professional services. The largest area of our business is management consulting. So like the big four, the Deloitte's, EY, KPMG, we function as a public accounting firm. So we've got the tax and accounting side of the house. We have audit and assurance services. But in consulting, our services range from strategic planning, IT advisory, financial advisory, business and compensation valuation, to performance management, compliance, operations, implementation. So it's a very broad range. And the common denominator of all of that, I think, really boils down to three areas. So I'll share with you the areas, and then I want to talk a little bit more about each one. So one is, Dina made these comments: communication skills and executive presence. I'll come back to that. Problem solving abilities, because really that's what consulting is. It's solving problems. And then it's an acumen in numbers. So I recognize in this audience, we're not CPAs per se. We're not, we don't have accounting and finance backgrounds, but understanding how to tell a story with numbers, or understand a story and numbers serves you well. So in communication skills and executive presence, it's really boils down to projecting a mature self-confidence. It's being concise. It's taking out the jargon. So the more simple, the better. And a lot of our our clients are physicians, they're hospital executives. So these are smart individuals, but they appreciate the simple and concise communication. And then, being able to present and own a room with other very talented, strong-willed individuals. Those are the kind of the main points under that executive presence. Problem solving. So we want to not just hear about your technical knowledge, because by the time someone is interviewing with me, for example, we've screened them. So some of the points, Kirk, you made about that, those are so critical, because you want to bypass that step. But once you get to me, for example, we know you've got the foundational skills. You'll learn, we'll teach. Everyone should always be in a humble posture of learning, always, all of us. But it's how do you navigate those things that make a difference? So on your resumes, in your interviews, demonstrate those outcomes, the metrics. I help take X, this from X to Y, whether that's, revenues or impressions or whatever the case may be, demonstrate that, and that will get you really far. And then really that last point about acumen and numbers, I talked about that. It's not being a numbers person or doing GLs, but it's understanding enough about it so that you can be helpful to the client. So I'll leave you with a few points of advice for those who want to transition into consulting. Really, it's read, read, read. There's lots of thought leadership out there, social media, even just learning, article headlines will be helpful in connecting some of those dots. Hungry, humble, and smart. I think we've all talked about that today. And then Catherine, you touched on this. It's pretty important in our space. It's, have you done your homework? So some people want to kick the tires and leverage this offer over another. That won't go far here. We want to know why you want to work here specifically. So doing that homework helps you kind of align with, your personal needs with that of the firm. So, well, I think I wanted to make sure we leave at least 15 minutes for Q&A. Jennifer, do you want us to go through the questions that are there? I know one participant raised a hand. I'm not sure if that was purposeful or not, so.
Yeah, why don't we just encourage everyone to still put their answers or their questions in the Q&A queue or in the chat box. Just a reminder to have it go to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see the comments, and if you're doing it in the chat. And Mushan, if you want to just kind of read through some of the questions and maybe delegate it to the person that might be able to answer that the most accurately.
Absolutely, and I think the audience can follow along in some of the answered questions. So if we don't get a lot more coming in, we'll look at those so that we can add any other comments. So Bill, it looks like you're typing an answer to this one. How much weight or impact would you give an LLM to an experienced candidate? For such an experienced, we're talking 10 years plus candidate, do you even look at the education portion of the resume? Great question.
And I did start to type, but I'll respond here. The more experience and the further away from graduation you are, I think the less relevance it becomes. I always look at education, so it never becomes irrelevant. But again, what's going to matter to me, especially for in-house, is what experience you have outside of school. So what have you done since? If your LLM, if you're experienced in health law, and then, for example, got an LLM in tax, that would be very relevant to me, right? So you've got some experience, you decided you wanted to specialize, or a tax exempt organization. That would definitely be meaningful to me. So it's never irrelevant. I think it depends on, you know, what it was and what you've done other than the education.
Any opposing perspectives on that other panelists want to share? I agree with you, Bill. How can I leverage a dual JD MPH degree for government and or law firm jobs? Kirk, do you want to take that one? You're muted, Kirk. Uh-oh. Still having trouble hearing.
How about now? Let's see.
Oh, there, perfect.
Apparently I have 2 mute buttons on my computer. That's very, very useful. Yeah, so from my point of view, like if the MPH is not a requirement, then it's going to be a sort of a plus mark in the column of demonstrated interest in healthcare law, particularly if you're saying you're a dual JD MPH, and if you have no other experience, no job, if you're just coming fresh out of school, I'm going to look at that as a bonus, as someone who has maybe, you know, shown that this is the space they want to be in. Will it give you an edge up? I think it probably would from my point of view. If I was looking as a manager to hire, would it be dispositive? I mean, probably not, but I mean, I think you're going to use every advantage you want at that point. Anyways.
Bill, any thoughts to offer there?
You know, I typed to another answer that I want to know somebody's interested in the field, because we hire for the long term. And I think I'm Kirk, I'm with you, that the MPH part shows me that you're interested in health policy. And one of the reasons you can tell after 30 some years, I'm still enthused about practicing in this area, because it's really policy related and it changes a lot. So that joint degree is definitely a plus. I'm with you, Kirk.
Awesome.
Well, and as someone who has that joint degree, absolutely. I mean, there's a whole lot you can do with the JD MPH, besides going to the government or going in-house. I mean, you could go compliance. I'm thrilled with all the questions about compliance. I mean, it's great. I mean, I'm super excited.
This next question, thoughts about hiring highly experienced, about 50. I'll assign that to myself. We love this here. So we've got a combination of, you know, I think sometimes people have the perception that I need 20 years of experience before I can be a consultant. And maybe that was the case, you know, in the 80s. But these days we love an MPH, a master's of healthcare administration, JDs who are interested in consulting. They come out right out of those graduate programs and they do well. They've got foundational skills that we can build on, and they'll start kind of in an analysis mode, but they're in front of the clients. So those above 50, they bring that wisdom to the table. They bring a lot of times a book of business or healthy networking, and they have a lot of staff development capabilities that we love, that really lends itself well to the consulting practice, which is very much a team approach that we take to our clients. So we love that. Any other thoughts on that question from the panel?
Well, the person I hired this past year is over 50. And so it's because she had the experience and both in life as well as professionally that I was looking for, in terms of somebody that's going to listen, work collaboratively, understands how to problem solve, and understands how to put that all into one nice tidy package to work with our operations and get folks where they need to be. So, you know, I welcome the experienced applicant, quite frankly.
Well, Dina, don't go on mute, because I'm going to switch over to the chat, and this is a compliance question. I am a recent graduate with a master's in legal studies, but I've had a very difficult time securing an interview in the compliance space, Kirk, government or otherwise. My concentration is in healthcare law, and I've greater than 10 years of experience in the healthcare space. It appears more prefer attorneys in the compliance space. My professors find it hard to believe, because I've I'm seen as the perfect candidate. It was refreshing to hear Dina say she hired someone without a legal background. So any other thoughts or advice for this participant?
Sure. I would make sure that if compliance is where you want to go, healthcare compliance is where you want to go. I would make sure that you tap into the Healthcare Compliance Association. And they have a wealth of resources for all of the healthcare compliance folks. And they also have a job board if you're interested. There are plenty of entry-level healthcare compliance jobs out there. And a lot of them are in some really nice places across the country. I wouldn't give up. I would make sure that you network with some compliance people, contact compliance officers at hospitals and healthcare organizations where you live. There are also some regional conferences that you can attend for not a whole lot of cash and really get a feel for what a healthcare compliance officer does. And it also enables you to meet some people. I'm very willing and happy to talk with you offline if you've got questions about the field and how to get started, because I think it's a great field. I think it's a growing field. Like Bill mentioned, I mean, healthcare policy is something that's just going to continue to grow and get more complex. And quite frankly, we need really super smart brains to help us navigate through that.
Absolutely. Bill, what would you say is the difference between compliance and an in-house role? Are the roles siloed?
Bill, I can't wait to hear what you say.
You and I might say the same thing. If they're siloed, you have a problem. It's a collaboration. It's absolutely a collaboration. We have a compliance department that is probably about half attorneys and half not, which is actually a nice mix. And when we hire someone who has a JD into compliance, I always make sure they understand that they're not being hired as counsel. They can't privilege things. They can't give legal advice. And that's actually never been a problem. One of my big issues, and I think one of you referred to it, or maybe several of you referred to it, when you're in it with a team, communication is essential. And I think our compliance department is as much a teammate to the legal function. And we communicate. In fact, next week, we are meeting together as the legal and compliance departments. And we're talking about issues that are common to both. So if they're siloed, I think that's a bad thing. I actually like when people look to move from one to the other, whichever way it goes. So I think there are lots of opportunities there. You don't have to be a lawyer to be in compliance. I think if your compliance team is entirely lawyers, I might question that a little, but I think the collaboration is essential.
I agree with Bill completely. So they are very different departments and their reporting structures are very different. I don't report to the general counsel in my organization. I actually report directly to the board of directors. And that I think is essential to having a better practice for your compliance function. That said, if I'm not talking to somebody in my legal department at least once a day about something, I start to get jittery because that relationship is so close. You really do have to lean on each other for a lot of different issues. And so I'm in constant contact with our legal department, our legal team, and we work as one going down the road. We just happen to bring different perspectives and different experiences and different knowledge to those issues.
I think we have time for a few more questions, and there's some good ones coming in. They've all been great. I am tired of hearing the answer after the interview process, quote, "You are too qualified." What does this really mean from the hiring manager perspective?
What type of job? I'm curious. I don't know if the person can follow up. Or what type of employer, I should say.
Let's give them a minute and see. Any other perspectives on that?
Yeah, I look, we sometimes have more junior positions, And one of the challenges of an in-house department, unlike law firms, there's only one general counsel, and that's probably not going to change. So sometimes when people come in at a junior level and they want to move up, they get frustrated because it's not like a firm where you progress from first to second to third year. That said, we have other positions that are specialists. Over 50, I love the answers to that. I can't imagine saying you're too qualified if someone's applying for a specialty position.
Gonna say for firms, obviously there's, as you mentioned, there's sort of a hierarchy when it comes to associates, and that doesn't mean we don't hire people who have, prior work experience before law school. But I think we do find that sometimes when someone is coming from has a significant background that perhaps isn't applicable to the class year progression, we're bringing, they say, well, I have 10 years of prior experience, but I want to come in as a second year associate. It might work for a year or two, and then we've just not seen that be super successful, because the person does come in, they get up to speed, they are contributing as an associate, and then they come back and say, but I have these 10 years of other experience that I want to, have kind of factor into my progression. And that, unfortunately, is just not usually a recipe for success for us. But that said, we've hired government affairs analysts, we've hired special projects lawyers. So there's sort of off-track associate position or off associate track positions that are not at my firm are not super common, but we're definitely seeing more of, just given the landscape of hiring these days. And so those are positions that certainly, like, we've hired people who've come from extensive backgrounds that are not necessarily applicable to kind of the associate track, but offer a tremendous wealth of experience. So I agree. I think that the overqualification kind of thing is maybe a little bit specific to the type of role you're looking at, but could be a huge benefit to certain other roles.
And I think we want to be respectful of everyone's time. We've got just a minute left here. You'll see in the chat feature that we have given you a link for that tips and tricks document that we've been referencing. So if you have any issues accessing that, please let us know and we will follow up with you via email. But really agree with your comments there, Catherine. I think a thought we'd like to leave you with is, part of this process, it's a two-way street. It's not just about you impressing these employers. You want to make sure that this is a place you want to end up. So the way that you're being, the communications, the responses like this one is indicative of the culture, or should be. And so if it's, if it feels like an excuse, that's likely not a place you want to be. So anyway, thank you for your participation today. Thank you to our panelists and our organizers at AHLA. I hope you've come away with some good food for thought. It has truly been a pleasure. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you. Everyone have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.